Hi, good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. Good morning out west. I'm Dave Delvecchio, the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Sourcepass, and we'd like to welcome you today to our panel discussion on global disruptions and IT strategy. We're going to be talking about some key IT strategies and ways that you can incorporate some best practices and knowledge into your IT planning and budgeting as you move forward. So we've put together what I've referred to as our murderer row of specialists today. We've got Nathan Taylor from our Microsoft Center of Excellence here within Sourcepass, who's going to be talking to us a little bit about from that Microsoft perspective from security concerns and IT strategy. Matt McCarthy is our Chief Client Officer, who is having conversations with both existing and potential clients all day, every day, and it brings a lot of insight in terms of what's top of mind for all of the folks that he's speaking to from a client's perspective. And we have a special guest with us today. Those within our industry know him as a very familiar name. Matt Lee is definitely a thought leader in this space. He works for one of our primary vendors, Pax8, and we're very excited to have Matt Lee with us. He's got an extensive MSP experience, but now he brings expertise not just from what Sourcepass as one provider has, but all of the MSPs they help support and all of the vendors who they represent as well. So we get a much broader perspective from Matt. So very excited to have them here today. Let's go ahead and start to bring them on stage, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Matt McCarthy, you popped up first. You get to introduce yourself first. So why don't you tell us who you are a little bit more?
Thank you, Dave. Everyone, good to be here. Matt McCarthy, Chief Client Officer at Sourcepass, as Dave mentioned. I have the opportunity to meet with our clients and really work on the strategy throughout our entire client's life cycle, from identifying the right clients that are the right fit for Sourcepass, where we can help them drive their business outcomes, through the ongoing, ever-changing, evolving landscape of all the things we're going to talk about today. So I love solving problems and love looking at client-first outcomes, but it's great to be here.
Awesome. Nathan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks for having me, Dave. Looking forward to this conversation. My name is Nathan Taylor. I lead the team here at Sourcepass in our Microsoft Center of Excellence. We're the part of Sourcepass that is focused on Microsoft 365, Azure, and professional services around those products. I also lead our team that's driving our CMMC division, Sourcepass Shield. So lots of exciting stuff going on. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Awesome. And our special guest, Matt Lee.
Oh, thanks for having me, y'all. I appreciate it. I just, like you said before, I come from the MSP space. I do a lot of research around current security challenges and do a lot of speaking for a living, I suppose. Fun fact, I went from 125 flights last year to 60-something flights to be more intentional in my travel this year. So cutting way back, it's been great and glad to be here. It's going to be an interesting topic. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, this is one, as we started putting this together, I was really excited about it as well, because it's so prevalent, and there's not just a single variable at play here. There's so many variables at play, and I think it makes for a very difficult time for IT leaders to really put together a comprehensive IT strategy with so much unknown. IT strategy has always been something that leaders have to kind of put a little bit of extra thought behind, but when you start looking at challenges from geopolitical conflicts to the impact that AI infrastructure is having on certain supply chains, there's a lot going on. So from each of your perspectives, what feels fundamentally different than where we were even 2 or 3 years ago, let alone 10 years ago? Nathan, why don't you lead off on that?
Yeah, I think the thing I've always said about AI from the first step was that it's an accelerator. It doesn't do a lot of creative stuff. It just accelerates stuff. It does stuff quicker. And I think you're seeing that drive just our industry, that the rate of change in every area is just faster. The economic changes are faster. The supply chains changes are faster. The time from a 0-day being discovered and exploited is gone from sometimes years, 5 years ago, to like minutes now. It's just the speed at which things are being changed and exploited. And it's a little bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but the world's moving quicker than we're used to. And as humans, our brains don't adapt to change well. We tend to think of things as being how they were, but it's changing. Our world's changing quickly.
Yep.
I think
I'll just add to that. Yeah, I'll add to that too. I think the speed of change is accelerating as it's accelerating. And there are paradigms that we have hung to very clearly that will not be true in the future. Simple things like I can wait a week to patch. That's not true. To Nathan's point, we're now at some from proof of concept. Just for anybody that doesn't know, once something comes out that's vulnerable or something that's weak, someone makes a proof of concept to prove that they can do it, to show the patch as part of a whole nother menagerie I won't get into. But the speed at which you can go from proof of concept to every single device that's exposed on the internet being destroyed is now sometimes 48 hours less. You're seeing negative 0 days, negative times, right? Where you're seeing known exploits happening before the patch is even talked about or the vulnerabilities being discussed. So yeah, I would just echo Nathan's point of the speed of our world is getting faster every day, not just the same linear speed. It's a acceleration on acceleration.
Not to repeat those, but I couldn't agree more, right? The speed of acceleration, and really I think about the speed of expectations. And I see all of us as business leaders at this really challenging intersecting point right now where business to business interactions and expectations have been mounting over the past few years. And if you think, I always compare it to business to consumer models where, think about the world today with Uber ordering things on your phone and the accessibility, the convenience, the ease on the business to consumer side. And that's been shifting and mounting in the business to business world where those expectations are now there. And business has been trying to keep up with and understand how do you adapt this way, leveraging technology, focused on the client experience. And while this has all been building and mounting, we've had these major disruptors that have come in between economic, technological, geopolitical, so many different factors that have now created this need for agility while everyone's trying to transform to this new world. So I think we're at a really, really challenging intersecting point, and it's overwhelming at times. Like you said, Nathan, humans are not adapt to change like this, and you got to kind of take a step back and really think about where you're at and what you need to do.
And I think one of the outcomes of that is that it's easy for people to want to stick their head in the sand, and especially if folks are not in what would be considered either a highly regulated industry or one that has intense data security requirements, they tend to think it's not going to happen to them. But whenever you have any sort of a geopolitical conflict, you usually see an uptick in cybersecurity incidents. And just because you might not be, might not view yourself as a geopolitical target, you might end up getting caught in the crossfire from a security standpoint. So how do global conflicts like what's happening with the war in Iran and the standoff at the Strait of Hormuz, how does that end up impacting a small business that might not be directly involved in government supply chains or in the sort of industries that you would think might be impacted by such a thing? Nathan?
Yeah, I think there's a couple immediate effects. Obviously we know the supply chain constraints around just that shipping. You never know where, I don't think there's a lot of technology flowing through the Straits of Hormuz, but there's a lot of things adjacent to it, materials, raw materials, fuel, that lack of oil is changing the supply chain and changing delivery dates. And I think, just reading what you're seeing, I think a lot of these entities, whether they're government entities or supported by the government, they like to collect their little tricks. They've figured out exploits and vulnerabilities, and they got their feet in different things, their fingers in different businesses. And then when these moments happen is sometimes when they go look at their bag of tricks and decide to pull something out. And so that's where you see all of a sudden there's a new attack. And I think they've been sitting on a lot of that for a while. They're just waiting for the reason to bring it out. And so I think you see attacks happening and just changes in the threat landscape because, it's part of a negotiation, man. If they can get, if Iran can get Trump on his heels because all of a sudden there's a big supply chain attack in the US, that's a part of the bargaining. And I think they're all looking for that little edge. And so I think we see changes in the environment just based on that extra energy getting put into that space.
And Matt, thinking about kind of where you and your organization sit in this, you've got kind of a stake on both ends of the spectrum, right? You're helping to work with MSPs who are supporting individual clients, but you also are working with a lot of these vendors, and you're looking at a potential, risk point everywhere through that chain, from the vendors and common shared platforms all the way down to local policies and a local client, right? So what are some of the less obvious ways that IT environments become exposed through some of these vendor relationships?
Yeah, holy gosh. Okay,
Give me an
so
easy one.
just for a little clarification for those out there, I run a charity called MSP 911, and we take MSPs, managed service providers, when they've had their very worst day, when a supply chain or something of their own fault, or potentially not their own fault often as well, they become victims, and as a result, all of their clients become victims of a ransomware actor. And up until late 2022, 2024, 2025, I would say threat actors in general weren't aware of that force multiplier. They weren't aware of the ability to use like a upline provider, like a managed service provider, as a way to weaponize against a large mass of populace. But that's changing. We just took case number 56, just to let that number set in the last 2.5 years that we've been providing this service. We were at 56 cases of managed service providers that have been attacked and their clients died at their own hand. But that's just the first tip of it. Like, to you as a partner out there, to Sourcepass, they're a supply chain to you. They have the keys to the kingdom, they have access, they have the ability to manage and control, and they need to be good stewards of that, and they need to be following good fiduciary principles in what they're doing. But at the same time, you're buying software every day that is absolute hot garbage, absolute trash. And I say that because I have this theory of capitalism that's called the middle theory. And it basically just says that products don't rise very much above and do not fall very much below the demand of the consumer, the consumer's maturity. And so if you aren't out there saying, hey, I'd really like to see a product that's made with better sprint cycles to reduce the number of bugs and vulnerabilities, to remove entire classes of vulnerabilities, to destroy the access to the confidentiality of my data. If you're not asking that question as a consumer, they're not making it better, because capitalism does not reward that. You will not spend more, then they are not going to make more. And in the same way, we've been going through this kind of path where even the managed service providers, if you want to be Sourcepass, and I hold you all in such a high regard, but it's literally can just be a sticky note on a wall that says I'm a managed service provider, and y'all are forced to compete with those type of organizations, while I happen to know exactly how robust your security premises are from the people and team I get to work with. But as a client or a partner out there, you're also buying software from people that your EMR, your dental software, your legal software, your front point of sale software, they're all trash because we've never forced them to be better. So you now put that at the confluence of, we now have very fast AI capabilities to enable lower and lower and lower barriers to entry of threat actors. And I use threat actors because I'm a hacker. And if you've ever cut in line and recess, you're also a hacker. You understand the world is manipulable around you, right? And these threat actors don't have a lower barrier and can be way more bespoke. And they can actually attack Matt in a way that will mean something to Matt, and Dave in a way that will mean something to Dave, and Cyber Matt Lee in a way that will mean something to Cyber Matt Lee at scale with efficacy. So you've got a confluence of bad software, no capitalism reward to fix the software in general. Even when bugs come in, sometimes security people like me get executed for turning in a bug. There's active wars right now with a dude in Microsoft. He's literally dropping O days like they're playing cards right now every 3 or 4 days, right? And so you have this challenge where, adding to that, now you have an angered nation state. And I'd say if you're a patriot, or if you live in another country and you're patriotic to that country, you're going to be offended when someone has offended your country. And that means that if there's a lower barrier to entry, there's more hacktivism capabilities, there's more opportunistic targets, there's more monetization and extraction. And we're fighting in different wars. So I'm not trying to paint this horrible picture, because I also have belief that there's a positive that comes from this too, long term. But I would say right now you said it well, Matt, and I'll hand it over to you. We're in a very hard space as an IT leader today because of all of these confluences of forces. And that's just a few of them. We could opine longer, but I don't like to go forever. So Yeah,
Well,
Matt,
I
go.
audibly chuckled when you made the first comment about the, hot garbage in terms of third-party software. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I remember back in the day, it was always difficult to boil everything we did as an IT service provider down into a 15-second elevator pitch. And the,
Sure.
the, the most accurate one I think I ever came up with was we help to support and secure poorly written third-party software. That's like our primary mission in life is
Yeah.
every line of business application, to your point, tends to and I don't know, this is an interesting question, whether it has this problem gotten better or worse. It used to be all of those applications 10 15 plus years ago were running on a local SQL server inside your LAN, and you had to try and make it play well with the other 7 SQL
Yeah.
servers running your other 7 applications, and it was always just a free-for-all trying to get that all work together. Do you think it's gotten better or worse as things have moved to cloud-based services or SaaS platforms?
Better.
Matt Lee.
Better. Better and worse. And to be a real security human, you get to say it depends a lot. But I'd say better in the sense that I'll picture this. You're in charge of a software company and you need to mail out or digitally distribute software updates to 5,000 consuming subscribers that have installed this on a SQL server. Now they could be on server 2008, 8R2, 12, 12R2, 16, 19, force function 03, 8, 802, 12, 14, 16, 19. They could be on various different setups, different permission structures, different tools being running, different things in the environment, different server structure capabilities physically, different speeds of disk, different. You now put out this software and you ask everybody to patch and you hope the world doesn't blow up, and you spend 30% of your time dealing with people calling in because A, they didn't know what they were doing, B, they didn't have the right setup, or C, you didn't account for their situation in your coding. That's the way the world worked in distributed software, in my very summarized opinion. When you go towards SaaS, as the SaaS provider, you have the opportunity. Now I'll say the opportunity because that's where this might fall apart. And Nathan, you see enough of this, you're shaking your head. But you have the opportunity to do it the same way. You can have good CI/CD or constant development capabilities, pipelines, where you can test stuff. You can then roll it to production after testing. You can have rollback capacitance. You can make sure that you have enough load capability to scale when you need to scale. You can do all those things in a way that's more homogeneous, which means that you can do it much better and do it at a scale that allows you to theoretically put more into the product and put more into the security and put more into the features and capabilities. I'd add that theoretical caveat because the other challenge is with the as a service model, which is amazing, right? And if you're not familiar with pizza as a service, go look up pizza as a service. That will explain it quite well. But in the as a service model, when you're asking someone else to SaaS or software as a service, you don't get to see what's behind the curtain. You can infer, you can guess, you can poke, you can prod, sometimes legally, sometimes not. I never do the illegal that I can get caught or attributed to me. But you can find that they don't necessarily aren't good stewards. And they unfortunately, the nature of raw capitalism, and it's wonderful, it's the worst form of economy other than all the others. But the thing about capitalism is that if there's profit to be made by just hiding something, it's very easy to, intentionally or otherwise. And so with SaaS, you lose a lot of the visibility that I could have said, Dave, let me see your patching process for servers, and let me understand how you're dealing with resiliency and how you deal with high availability, and explain to me how you're backing this up, and explain. Go ask that of your SaaS vendor. Like if you're on this call, go ask your SaaS vendor those questions, see how that works for you. And I think that's the challenge of this, Dave. But I do believe it's better. And if we were to fast forward capitalism, it will definitely be better because of a lot of those things we're talking about, that if we as the consumer demand it, there's enough economic scale for those providers to do the things in a way that you would not be able to do. And gosh, don't even get me started on vibe coding the solution today yourself and what that would mean from that risk perspective. But I think better, Dave, in my opinion, if I was to sum
Matt,
up.
I want to go with where you're covering on the SaaS aspect of things, but also going back to 2 points you made on the ecosystem that you're part of that we need to consider. And then the other piece is the positives of this daunting, overwhelming topic that we're talking about. So I'll share a positive for me with everything going on, in that I spend my day, every single day, every minute of my day, enforcing and just educating the importance of security with clients. And so our world today has helped me do that and has cut down on some of that talk time because it is top of mind to everyone.
Yeah, sure.
But I want to kind of translate this into, as a business leader, how do you break this down, and really what action should you be taking? And coming back to our conversations, I think of things you need to focus on what you can control and what you can't control with an asterisk. What you can control comes back to the things that we're educating on day in and day out. Is you've got to focus on the fundamentals, in my opinion. Within your environment, doubling down on identity security, MFA, user awareness, and then most importantly, your incident response readiness, what your plan is, because it's a matter of how you react when you need to react. And I bucket that into that area of what you can control. What you can't control, I think about in that relates to the ecosystem comment, because you've got to be thinking about who your most critical suppliers, vendors, partners are, and what is their security posture? How vulnerable are you, to your business if in the event something does happen to them? That's where it comes, full circle back to what you were saying, Matt, is you've got to be really thinking about your key partners, whether it's a SaaS provider solution, a different provider you're working with. So as you focus on what's within control of your environment and doubling down on the fundamentals, you then really got to start looking at this broader ecosystem you're part of, and then prioritizing within that ecosystem who's the most important and most impactful to your business.
And Matt, sometimes that's hard because you as a client may find that the partner, as Matt and team go through and talk to this line of business software, isn't the one for you. Like, they're not going to set you up for success. They're going to have problems. There's a lot of operational pain in changing. There's a lot of gut it takes as a leader to say, yep, this is the right move. I don't think they're ever going to get where we need. They're not the right partner. They're going to eventually cause me problems. I think that's smart, Matt, to that point of like, it takes leadership to navigate those waters and to know who your providers are, make some form of an assessment. And I guess I'll go back to something that's a nerdier bit that isn't necessarily for all of the people listening, which is the frameworks and the basics still matter, Matt. You nailed it. Like it still comes down to having a good asset inventory, making sure that you have EDR on all the assets that you need and MDR in response. And to your point, Matt, I handle these incidents for the MSPs, and it is very rare that an MSP has a incident response plan. And it's even rarer, I would wager, that your clients have an incident response plan. And so it's just such a good call out of stop assuming it's not going to happen. I used to tell my technicians, live compromised. If you know there's going to be something happening right of boom or after the explosion, the better we limit that damage, the better we're back to business as usual. And the more we've controlled it up front and made good choices, the better we're back to business as usual. Like this is about, that moving forward.
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, this is where those cybersecurity framework sometimes can help. Now, there's a lot of different aspects of this. You were mentioning about, from a supply chain standpoint, needing to look beyond just your vendor, but your vendor's vendors. And that was a basic premise behind HIPAA, which was really one of the first widely adopted industry-specific frameworks where you had your covered entities and your third-party providers as part of that equation. But Nathan, you mentioned how you help support our CMC group, Sourcepass Shield, as well. A lot of times the compliance question helps provide some sort of definition to the structure that you need to make sure that you are covering these bases. So talk about that a little bit and how working within those frameworks might be able to provide guidance to people. It's not just a box to tick, but actually can lead to solid business outcomes if you put your effort in the right places.
Yeah, I would say the first thing to remember is that compliance is not security, but it can drive security. Compliance is following the rules, and whatever those rules are in your industry. If it's HIPAA, it's to keep that data private. That's somebody's private data. It's your job to be accountable for what happens to that data. CMMC is similar. Hey, we've got government data, CUI, that can't be out of your control. You need to be able to vet where it is and who had access to it, and make sure nobody who doesn't have the right to have access got into it. So it's really helpful to drive conversations, start to understand the risk. And as Matt was talking about, there's a real sense in which, what are your devices? What's your data? What's your applications is where we're going to start with all these things. So that's the what we're securing. But then the question becomes why, and starting to understand what your regulatory requirements are, give you the ability to now understand how to approach the problem. And CMMC is a great example. We're often leaning towards, you can't secure an entire business to CMMC level 2 levels of security. It's just not feasible for most businesses from a cost, complexity, and a business process perspective. So in order to meet those compliance requirements, we're almost always building an enclave, and we're taking that data and putting it in a corner, putting a lot of walls around that corner and saying only the people with the super secret decoder ring can get into the corner and look at the data in the corner. And that's how we get that compliance. Because if you try to do it over a 500-person manufacturing org, you're just gonna escalate your costs in astronomical ways. But the process of getting into that is informative, because you start to understand, okay, what data am I securing and why, and what are the rules around it? And I think for small business, I think often you think, well, I'm just a little, I make widgets. What's our exposure? Well, you might have more exposure than you think, and understanding, what requirements you have from your bank, from your loans, from your customers, from all the different things you touch on. You need to understand what your requirements are and what your risks are. And yeah, maybe you're a manufacturing firm, but we saw Iran was weaponizing PLC controllers recently. Those are everywhere in manufacturing sites. So all of a sudden you go from, well, I don't have any exposure, to you may have the one thing they're attacking at scale, and now you have a giant risk to your entire operation because you didn't understand your exposure there. So I think compliance is a great place to start to frame the discussion especially for small business.
In my opinion, Nathan, it's a journey. It's an ongoing journey. And if you don't feel like you need to follow certain compliance frameworks today, you still need to be on your journey, whatever that journey may be. Yep. Because it's coming at some point in time. And it's coming because it will be mandated and it will be forced as this continues to expand throughout ecosystems. But it's also coming because it's a differentiator today in some ways, but it will also be a requirement, to do business with many folks in the future. And, to your point on, CMMC and the strategy of an entire environment, CMMC compliant versus enclave, there's so much overinvestment because of the confusion, and everyone wants to go kind of full bore, and you really need to have the right guidance to understand what direction are you pointed in, and whether you need to be there, tomorrow or a defined date or not. You need to be on a journey and understanding what that looks like for you in the future. I think that will help businesses not overinvest, and also speed is a huge factor here, because for businesses that did not have to have a formal attestation of CMMC compliance a year or 2 years ago, that turned very quickly. And if you're not getting a running start on your journey, then all of a sudden speed becomes a big challenge, right? So there's a lot there.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Nathan, as we were just getting rolling, you actually started bringing up some really good points about the impact that AI is having on supply chains. And we were talking a little bit about it kind of in the green room, so to speak, behind the session. But there's another added layer of challenges right now that are going on, in that memory prices and hard drive prices are kind of going nuts. And it's leading to a lot of instability in pricing, to the point where if you got a quote yesterday, it might not still be applicable today, because that's how volatile the markets have been. So let's talk about that sort of an impact. One of my pet peeves is when people refer to this as unprecedented. Now, again, I've been doing this long enough that I remember other similar types of circumstances where memory would go up $20 a megabyte back in the big 90s when there was an earthquake in Japan. So there's always been this volatility, but costs have been so stable for so long, I think people forget that these things are commodities. And so, Matt McCarthy, we'll start with you. You and I were having a conversation yesterday where you shared you're finding a trend starting where folks that had previously committed to 100% cloud are starting to re-embrace the discussion about bringing some services back on-prem with more of a hybrid approach. What sort of conversations are you having with folks that, where you're seeing that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's such a move to go all cloud for everyone's, entire environment. And then, as OpEx started to increase, there's kind of this pull a little bit back to on-prem or hybrid. But now as hardware costs have, skyrocketed, you have these two kind of beasts, playing tug of war, if you will. And to me, it comes down to prioritization. You've got to be thinking about the most critical applications and components of your business and what is the right infrastructure for that business. I'm going to take kind of a different angle on this. Maybe we come back to this topic, but planning, having a true defined technology and security roadmap is obviously key for any organization, and that's got to be at the center of your P&L. I'll argue this any day. It's your P&L has to be structured around your technology investments. It's at the core of your business. You can't argue that. And historically, technology plans, everyone wanted to aim for the 3-year plan and work backwards into then narrow it down to the next 4 quarters. In my view today, technology planning needs to be more agile. It needs to be a narrower window, 1 at most 2-year plan, but in that 4-quarter plan over the next year, there's got to be different scenarios within your technology plan so you can have that agility. You may want to go all cloud and you may want to move your infrastructure out, but have that plan B or have that option within your technology plan to have that agility. But if you're not thinking ahead on those things, that's where you get caught flat-footed. You're pigeonholed into one specific plan or one approach, and then you're at the mercy of the costs or these variables that we're talking about that change overnight.
Yeah, and I think that in addition to just looking to take on new workloads, expanding, those are all of the sexy applications of new technology. Sometimes change is thrust upon you, and I know one thing that we've been looking at internally is with the end of extended support coming up for Windows Server 2016. How many are still out in the wild? The good news is I think the average is less than a half a Windows 2016 server per client we support, which, hey, that's good. We've done a pretty good job of getting those out of production environments. But we're a large enough company that's still hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Windows 2016 servers. So, someone's thinking about kind of going through their refresh cycles, and maybe they've got a lot of end of support systems that need to get refreshed over the next 6 to hopefully less than 12 months. Do you think that there's going to be a greater propensity to have those on-premise as opposed to cloud-based? And does that now kind of lock in that over the next 26 or next for the usability lifecycle of that hardware, that client is now kind of married back to that hybrid approach? Or how flexible can those adoptions be? Matt McCarthy, I'll kind of throw it to you to kind of start that.
Yeah. I do think that there would be a shift in more of the hybrid thought process and more into clients' environments, but not a dramatic shift. Because we have to remember, and even though I'm saying shorter term planning, you've got to keep kind of the longer term vision in place. And to me, it comes down to the right solutions to drive the right business outcomes. And you've got to determine, the most critical applications and components of your business. What is the right solution and what is the right long-term solution? So you shouldn't be making knee-jerk reactions of bringing things on-prem because the cost of compute is high, and so forth. Like there's going to be that volatility. So I think there'd be a little bit of shift back and forth, but not a major pull.
Nathan, you're nodding. From a Microsoft perspective, what are you hearing from Redmond? What is Microsoft's take on, on-prem versus cloud adoption of those traditional server processes?
Yeah, I know, of course, Microsoft wants to drive Azure revenue. That's one of their biggest goals as a corporation. So they're excited to see people go to the cloud. And I think even with this 2016 conversation, Microsoft will give you extended support for servers you move to the cloud. So if you do have that legacy 2016 server, you're like, yeah, I'm not touching this in the next 3 years. It's going to have to stay here. Moving it to Azure, doing a lift and shift and migrate to Azure gives you that extended support. So they've built some cool capability in there to facilitate that. But from a product perspective, they've added a number of things that are actually really facilitating the hybrid environment, because I think it's just the reality, as Matt said. I think for a while there it was, hey, I only do on-prem, and then it was everything must go to the cloud. I think people are starting to recognize that there's workloads that work better in both places. And a great example in small business is there's just a lot of line of business apps that need a big old SQL server to run well. And that gets really expensive paying monthly in Azure. And you can buy a lot of server, or you could have bought a lot of server a year ago to run that on premise. These days, it's a little bit more complicated with the supply chain constraints and costs. But that idea of, hey, I may have some things that are more cost effective or work better on-prem than in the cloud is things that I see people being more nuanced in discussing. But Microsoft is releasing some cool technology, though, that really support that. Azure Arc lets you manage your on-prem servers and your cloud servers from the same environment, consistent patching, consistent management interface, vulnerability data, security configurations. So that's some cool capability. They also are in public preview releasing AVD hybrid. And so we're now having the ability where I can run AVD in almost any environment. I can run it on my VMware or Hyper-V or, bare metal environment on-prem. And I'm thrilled about that because it's been one of the gaps for on-prem people is how do I remotely access that data? Because it's always been one of the biggest risks. Hey, I got to open a port to let people into this data I have running in my office or my data center. Number one hacking target. It's just put a sign out, say, come poke around here, see what you can find. AVD kills that and gives us the ability to have scalable, secure, trackable, conditional access controlled, MFA managed remote access. And now that we can do it on premise, we can put that AVD host right next to that on-prem server that has that line of business app. So as much as Microsoft wants to drive that Azure revenue, they're facilitating more nuanced configurations with the technology they're coming out with. And I think it puts people in a really great position to say, what is the best solution for my business and for specific scenarios? And I think for most businesses, it's going to be a mix. Don't run your email on premise. Don't do that. We won't support it.
Please.
Right?
There's a reason why everyone moved to the cloud so quickly. Yeah.
Right. But maybe your line of business stays on-prem, but you're going to use a couple SaaS apps in the cloud and you have a couple servers in the cloud and you got a mixture. That might be the right call for your business to have, a very hybrid approach, but with a consistent, security approach on top of it to make sure it's all done securely. So it's exciting times to be working through these things.
Absolutely. And I guess one of the benefits of working through these things is that we've got the strength in the network. So Matt Lee, talk about how when it comes to kind of addressing some of these concerns, the strength through collaboration from the vendors through distributors like Pax8 through MSPs like Sourcepass delivering value to the client, how we all work together to kind of help address these issues and hopefully create a little bit of stability in a unstable environment.
Yeah. So many of you live below the cybersecurity poverty line. Wendy Nather coined that term in 2013, speaking about that most SMBs have a challenge to either money, expertise, influence, or capability to solve these problems themselves. And again, I reference you back to the software that you're using that's junk that, even to your point, Dave, a lot of time as a sysadmin, we just care about keeping you running, keeping your business functioning. But we're fighting against bad configurations, Sophie's choices with respect to security challenges, things in that nature. So I would start with you're below the cybersecurity poverty line. But that said, the solve, I think, comes from this kind of economy of scale and knowledge of scale and sharing of scale that's kind of risen up to solve this problem, these ecosystems, to your point, right? I did a talk at a hacker conference called GERCON called MSPs Suck, but the world without them is worse. And I, again, gave that talk at RSA last year and got a top-rated speaker on it. But the point was that as an MSP, SMB, close your eyes and imagine, what do you spend on top-line revenue on all tech? Like all tech. Averages across the world in Europe is 4 to 7%, United States 6 to 7%. So it's holding pretty evident that 6 to 7% of your top line revenue goes to tech, all tech. And if you also take the last census, 14.9 million businesses out there under $500,000 in revenue, you now find yourselves where that 7% is 35 grand. That includes the laptop and your line of business software. And so you're finding yourself below the poverty line. You have limited choices from that capability, but the ecosystem solves it. Nathan and team have seen the same problem 47 times by the time you have this. They've seen the same types of go-to-market strategies play out 20, 30 times with different customers, and they've seen the outcome. And Matt, you talk to hundreds of people about their world and what they're dealing with, and you see the outcomes. And remember, this is a lot more like a chess match than it is a weighted game in a casino, in the sense that you can make decisions today at a strategy level with Matt or team to start changing little things about your world to make life significantly easier so that you're not running an on-prem server or hybridization because you aren't dependent on those things in some way. If you're not a code producing entity, in Matt Lee's opinion, then you are probably not generating code, making sites and hosting and have all these growing grandiose SaaS costs. You're simply stuck with this one EMR that you've been using with these 19 EHR integrations in, and to change that would take a lot of work and effort. Instead, you just keep kicking the can down the road. And unfortunately is, Nathan, you and I have been on conference calls together with Microsoft in various other capacities, sharing knowledge for the better part of the last 10 years that I can remember. And that is something unique in our industry, Dave, to your question, that is, we have this ecosystem that is uniquely trying to support the underserved of our populace because they make up so much of our GDP. It's 43%, I think it is, of our GDP in the United States is small business. So we find ourselves serving the underserved in a way that has not enough ourselves. We ourselves oftentimes find ourselves below the cybersecurity poverty lines. You couple that with vendors, and you find some that are trying to give back, that really care, and others that are trying to hit a P&E balance sheet, and that's all they're looking at. And so you end up kind of finding your own. And Nathan and team, Matt, and I'll kick it back to y'all. A lot of what you do is finding your own people that are going to support the mission, that are going to make your clients better. And Matt, you said it so well already. We just care about that end customer actually making the widget they're going to make, going home, feeding their family, and going to play at the lake on the weekend. Like that's what we're here for. That's the dream. And so how do we convert that back? I'd say, Dave, we create an ecosystem that shares like this. But at the same time, we also call those vendors accountable. I mean, Nathan, you and I have been literally threatening vendors to leave because they won't give us SSO, because they want to tax us for their own sins of the past, right? And so, anyways, yeah. So it's nuanced, Dave, but I wouldn't be in any other ecosystem. That's for sure.
Yes, and I think it's probably an underappreciated aspect of a solid MSP relationship is that vendor selection process that we put our vendors through, because honestly, at the end of the day, an EDR platform is a shovel. It's just a tool.
Sure.
But it's how well it can help you dig a hole that's important, right? And so when you have solid, not only a solid product, but solid vendor support, it makes the support that we're offering our clients that much easier. And so, Matt, I know you have this conversation with both clients and prospective clients, Matt McCarthy. Describe a little bit. I know you work very closely with our product team, and Anthony Latham, who heads that team, in terms of making sure we provide feedback so that as we're deploying solutions to our clients, we're really able to stand behind it because we know our vendor is standing behind us.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, first, having a partner like Pax8 provides such a variety of solutions that are out there, and then the right support for them is key. And Matt, I mean, I don't want to repeat your comments, but you said it so well. I mean, we're all focused on servicing the underserved. And sorry, Dave, I'm going a little off topic here, but I'm passionate about this one. That poverty line you're referring to, and the security poverty line, is also enterprise grade technology in many ways. And it's becoming further and further spread apart because as more technologies get delivered and are on the market, they're often geared towards the larger organizations because companies can pick up more revenue in bigger chunks that way. And so that this line that we're talking about, the spectrum, is becoming further and further for the SMBs. And that's where this whole ecosystem of what we have together of the power of economies of scale, the expertise of seeing these situations and challenges happen time and time again, helps bridge that gap quite a bit. And so for Sourcepass, you've got to be thinking about your core competency as a business should be focusing on producing that widget. It should not be focusing on what EDR solution you're using today versus tomorrow. That's where Sourcepass is constantly looking at not only the data from one client, but all of our clients, the thousands of clients, together, and then leveraging the expertise of partners like Pax8 to then look at an even broader ecosystem and then make decisions based on the right solutions for our clients. And that's simply part of the service that we're delivering, so our clients can focus on really their end client.
Yeah, and I guess the next step is if I sitting in the role of whether it's a practice administrator in a 35-person medical practice or a VP of technology or CIO for a 350-user manufacturing company, I'm convinced that I need to do this. What advice do you have for those people to then convey that value to their decision makers to get that 6 or 7% of budget because they're consistently underfunded? How does a IT leader in an organization help make the case for what's needed in today's landscape?
I say tell stories. I say tell stories, especially if you're technical, you live in a technical human, and you're a practice manager and you know what you need. Translating raw facts and nerdy bits to people doesn't work, but translating business outcomes explaining things in analogies and work very, very effectively, I think, of translating the message. I won't take up the rest of the air with that. Matt, you look like you had something to say.
I always challenge, find any employee at any organization that does not rely on technology to be successful. You can't. I'll take that all day, right?
Yeah.
And someone challenged me one time with a farmer, a sort of farmer. Think about the technology in farming today in agriculture. The AI to understand the progress that crops are making or not, the efficiency that you can get. I mean, it goes on and on. And so if you think about so David, to drive that 6 or 7%, you got to think any employee that doesn't rely on technology to be successful. Your employee satisfaction drives your customer satisfaction. Your customer satisfaction drives your revenue for your business and the success of your business. It's a simple circle in my world.
Yeah. Actually,
and
I think Matt, please.
And Matt, to your point, that expectation is getting way more Uber-esque and Amazon delivery. Like, bro, I hit Amazon delivery hard. Like, they deliver to my house several times a day, right? Like, we've gotten to that level of convenience expectation. And even in the B2B, like when I bought a house recently, the title experience, I expected the level of interaction, communication, reliability of information, ability to serve myself, so many of those things that if you are already just trying to kick that small can down the road and you still don't have the budget, how in the heck are you going to get to those business outcomes that Matt's speaking about? And I think people do miss this. Small business is ephemeral. You don't have to continue being that doctor's office. Like, there can be reasons that doctor goes and works for another doctor's office because they can't run the practice. Like, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I'm just saying we are at a point where the ephemerality and how quickly a business may go away means that if you're not getting to that point, being able to reach that, Matt, you said it in the very beginning of this talk, of the expectations are getting significantly more compressed of that time for business to business. If you're not able to get there, then you're not going to win. Just not to cut you off, Matt, on your analogy, or Dave.
No, spot on.
Yeah, and I know Matt, you were talking about how find an employee that doesn't work with IT. Maybe folks can use this visual, but I knew somebody used to say IT is the thumb because it's the only finger that touches every other finger, and so IT works with finance and HR and operations and marketing and every other company, division in the company, but it's the one that touches them all. And so, I think that exposure that technology has to all of the employees, I think, is really kind of the key driver. And you try to take somebody's technology away and get their job done, it's just not even possible anymore. So we're starting to round here. We got a couple questions left. We're rounding towards the close. I see we have our first chat in. I appreciate that. But I wanted to ask the question: if we put this band of merry gentlemen together again in 12 months' time, and it's May of 2027. What would IT leaders wish they took away from today's session to put them in the best position 12 months from now? Who wants to start with that? Nathan, we haven't heard your voice in a while. I'll put you on the spot.
I think you go back to conversation number one, that the world's changing quicker than you think. I've had an opinion that I know nerds, and nerds are inherently lazy. Will find the easiest way to do things, and threat actors are nerds, and so they will find the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest way to accomplish things. But one of the things that's happening is AI is taking over jobs that humans used to do, and AI is not lazy. AI is efficient. And so I think we're just going to see an increase in attacks on things that were not a problem over the last few years. That doors left unlocked, cabinets that don't have a latch on them are going to get jiggled. And so I do think it is important that if you think, well, we've been unscathed so far, I think it's important to just expect that the world's going to continue to change, and you're going to have to up your game. If you don't have, as we talked about, an actual approach where you've thought through what is the risk to my business. You guys are asking, how do you convince people to talk about security? Well, I think that starts with listening to the business owners. Tell me about your business. Tell me what where do you make money? Tell me about what are the risks, what keeps you up at night? What are the things that you're afraid of? What would be detrimental to your business? Okay, let's talk about how much it would cost if your customer database got stolen, or if your entire production system got shut down. You just got to help them think through, like, these are legitimate risks. And as Matt said, we see businesses that have been in business for 30, 40 years, fundamentally sound, good business people who just go out of business overnight because it's a cyber attack just undercuts them. And so I think just expecting that the world is continuing to evolve and that maybe we've been safe so far, but we want to make sure that we're being proactive and get ahead of this curve.
Yep. I'm gonna cheat and steal two here. I think the first one I didn't cover earlier is if you're not following some form of a standard, it means you're saying you're the smartest guy or gal in the room. And if you're willing to say that, then you better be able to prove that, because to Nathan's point, we will have more incidents. There will be things coming. So I'd advocate use a standard, but there's also positives for a standard, right? Ohio was the first state in the union to pass a safe harbor clause that protects businesses by saying, hey, if you at least are following a standard at the time of your incident, then you may be held to limited or no liability. And there's been 20 other states that are trying to pattern after that same methodology, or 20-something that are trying to pattern after that same methodology. So the argument is there's a carrot too, which is following somebody else that's smarter than you's advice, a group of humans that have shared this zeitgeist of what is happening in cybersecurity is a good advice. Narrowing that down, the question that was asked by Sarah is actually where my brain goes with this. If you do not have an incident response plan, then in the next 12 months, you will have wished you had had an incident response plan. When I take the calls from these victims and get to hear their story, they never have the calm of, I know that my next step is to call my insurance, and my primary step is to make sure that I'm reaching containment on assets, and that means that I will not have access to this line and this production line for this many hours, which means I will now, having that plan and even finding that plan to be wrong gives you a lot of peace. It gives you a lot of knowing where you're at, and also it makes you make better decisions. Why do I say that? Well, if you don't believe that you can ever avoid an incident, then how do you do well in one? It's the Kobayashi Maru. It's how well do you actually act in an impossible situation. And I think having a plan and knowing that I call Nathan and team and that their first step's going to be this and that the next steps are going to be that, and these are my critical systems, even try to unpack that. How many of you know what your critical systems are? How many of you know that box making machine is actually what makes you more money than your entire production line because it saves you $3 billion in buying boxes? How many of you know what that quote to cash line looks like with your technology stack? And I'm not asking these to beat you up. I'm saying most don't, which means you don't know where your data is. You don't know where it lives. You don't know what's valuable. You don't know how to be weaponized against you. And so starting with that incident response plan and working back and tabletopping that start to cause you to understand the gaps you have in the rest of your knowledge. And if I look a year from now, Dave, to your question, and I'm looking back, I think I'd be a healthier company just having gone through that exercise and even not having an incident, because I now know what makes me money, what things I need to invest in. Matt, to your question about how you focus on the business functions, if they don't know that path, how do they focus on the business functions? So I'll just grabbing straws. So it would be have an incident response plan would be my short answer there, Dave.
Excellent. Matt McCarthy, just to reboot it, 12 months from now, what do you wish that our IT leaders will have done today to improve their posture?
Two things. One, continue to focus on the fundamentals of security. If they're not in place today, I mean, that's what's right in front of you and within reaching distance. So you got to focus on that. The second is really challenge your budget and your budget planning and think about where IT and security fits into that. Think about how important IT is to your employee experience, your employee retention, your employee satisfaction, your customer satisfaction. You so really challenge where IT sits within your budget and how you're investing in it.
Can I pile on with McCarthy? I love your say like the fundamentals, but let's call out what those are. I think it's easy to think, I need to be using polymorphic quantum resistant encryption for my small business. Like those fundamentals are, and this is from data.
Oh,
it was gold coming too.
Is your email secure? Like, have you gone through the basics of email security? I mean, the things we're seeing people getting attacked on is not crazy, insane, Iranian threat actors launching 0 days. It's just compromising passwords and email. And so that business email compromise is the number one attack, is the number one vector. And, you think everybody has it figured out, but man, I can tell you a lot of businesses still don't have those things deployed properly, and they're not hard, but they're fundamental and you need to spend the time to do them. So I hope next year we're not talking about that. Difference.
Yeah, unfortunately, we probably will be. So unfortunately, we probably will be in certain instances, but there's a parallel question to this, which is, I was going to leave with what's one piece of advice each one of us would give, and I think it ties into that forward looking view that we just offered. But I'll also incorporate, Sarah, these were excellent questions, and we're probably not going to address all of them as you let us off the hook to do in your close. But I will follow up with you because there's some good ones in here. But I think your questions actually lead to the piece of advice I will offer as we kick this off. And that's that if there's one key takeaway, it's to do everything in your power to build a security mindset within your organization. A lot of times people will have the view that MFA is just an impedance to helping me work fast. Why do I have to have a multi-factor authentication? Or they'll see security, that application approval process that was alluded to early in today's call, where you have to, contact IT to allow the system to install a new piece of software. Well, if you can't install the drivers for a new printer that you just ran out to Staples at lunchtime and decided to put on your desk, that also means someone with accidental access with malicious intent can't launch malware on your device either. So you have to accept the security mindset of being security first. And I think, simple things like trying to convince folks to adhere to a file naming convention, or figuring out, reviewing software permissions on who should have access to both, fall directly under that umbrella. So, Nathan Taylor, any other pieces of advice you want to offer as a parting shot?
Yeah, I think pragmatic security is always the place to start with small business. And as Matt's been pushing, some of these frameworks are a great way to start that. You need something to help you think through these challenges because there's wrinkles you haven't thought of, and those frameworks make you at least, you can choose to ignore them, but at least you've made an intentional choice to ignore them. The frameworks help you think through the problem. So big fan of the frameworks like the CIS, and I think it's a great place to start.
Matt McCarthy, do you have any parting shots?
It doesn't happen overnight. You've got to have a journey. You've got to have a plan. There's always going to be new challenges, new problems that we're working to solve for. And the key is just always being on a journey, your security journey, your IT strategy, your AI journey, et cetera, your compliance journey. You got to be on a journey, but there's no end to that journey. It's just, you got to have that agility along the way, but it doesn't happen overnight. Don't be overwhelmed. Just have a journey.
Excellent. Yeah. And special guest of the day, thank you very much for taking part today, Matt. Matt Lee, What is your parting shot?
It's a little bit of a steal from Matt McCarthy, which is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I think too many times as humans, we wait for that perfect next plan, the perfect strategy, the fully filled out tactical methodologies that we're going to use. And we miss the very simple wins. Like, let's go harden up our email a little bit, to Nathan's point, right? Let's go maybe put in, start an internal champion for security in our world. So don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Take the wins where you can get them.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I want to thank each one of you for taking some time today to come take part in this panel. Matt, and Nathan, really appreciated all your insights. And thank you for those guests that joined us for this conversation. We do want your feedback. So if you, when you receive that survey, but we do ask that you please fill that out and get that back to us, and we will take that into account. And if you think of anything after the session where you might want to follow up with a question specific to one of our folks, or you generally want to have a question answered, always feel free to email events@sourcepass.com. That comes to us here on the marketing team, and we'll go ahead and loop in the appropriate resource to help address any questions you might have. If you want to register for any of those upcoming events we talked about at the outset of today's call, you can use this QR code or go to sourcepass.com/events to join us there. Otherwise, Nathan, Matt, thank you very much, gentlemen. This has been a pleasure, and I really appreciate all your insights today. This was phenomenal.